Thank the stars this HFY legend crossed your path today, because you're about to witness the greatest military blunder in galactic history. The Vorath Empire had made plenty of spectacular mistakes over the centuries. They once sacrificed 40 warships to a magnetic storm their own scientists had predicted days in advance. Their diplomats famously signed away the mining rights to 3 resource-rich moons after confusing the words temporary lease and permanent surrender in Standard Galactic. One particularly brilliant Supreme Admiral even declared war on a civilization that had been extinct for nearly 500 years. Those disasters became Academy case studies, laughed at across the galaxy. But none of them, not one, came close to the day the Vorath Empire looked at humanity and decided we would be easy to conquer, which honestly deserves its own historical archive. No. The worst mistake the Vorath Empire ever made was a Tuesday afternoon on a transit station called Pellery 9, when a soldier named Dreos decided to backhand a small human child because she was standing too close to the checkpoint line. Her name was Mara. She was 7 years old. She had a stuffed animal shaped like a blue dog, and her father was standing 6 meters away, watching the whole thing. His name was Callum Voss. I know what you are thinking. You are thinking, oh, another story about human rage, another tale of the pink-skinned creatures and their laughable emotional responses. We had all heard these stories. Every species in the galactic congregate had heard these stories. They were entertainment. They were folklore. They were the kind of thing you told your hatchlings at night to make them laugh. Because surely the accounts were exaggerated. They were not exaggerated. I was there. My name is Sarakon, and I was a junior cultural observer assigned to Pellar 9 under the congregate's neutral monitoring program. I had a clipboard, a recording device, and approximately 0 combat training. I was there to document trade negotiations. I was not prepared for what I witnessed, and I have spent every rotation since trying to process it. So let me start from the beginning. Pellery 9 was not a glamorous station. It sat at the edge of Vorath-controlled space like a tooth that needed pulling, a rusted commercial hub with 17 docking bays, a market district that smelled like fermented grain and engine coolant, and a population of roughly 12,000 beings from 40 different species. Humans had been operating a small trade post there for about 6 standard years. They called their district Voss Corner because, as it turned out, most of the humans there were either related to or employed by one Callum Voss, who had apparently decided that the edge of Vorath-controlled space was a perfectly reasonable place to build a family business. I had met Callum Voss twice before the incident. The first time was during a routine documentation visit where he offered me something he called coffee, which I declined, and then he drank 3 cups of it himself while describing his supply chain logistics in more detail than I needed or wanted. He was by most external measurements unremarkable, medium height for a human, somewhere in the age range they call mid-40s, with hair the color of storm clouds, and eyes that were a very ordinary shade of brown. He spoke calmly. He smiled often. He had a habit of tilting his head slightly when he was listening, like he was filing away everything you said into some internal cabinet he might refer to later. The second time I met him, he was teaching his daughter how to play a board game, and she kept cheating, and he kept letting her. And when I asked him about it, he just shrugged and said, "She is 7. She is learning the game. There is no point winning against someone who does not know all the rules yet." I thought about that later. I thought about it a lot. The Vorath checkpoint on Pellar 9 had been a source of tension for months. The Empire had been slowly tightening its administrative grip on the station, which was their standard operating procedure, before a formal annexation. First you establish checkpoints, then you establish curfews, then you establish a garrison, then one morning you wake up, and the station is not a neutral commercial hub anymore. It is a Vorath administrative outpost, and if you want to leave, you need 17 forms of documentation and a good reason. The checkpoint guards were not chosen for their customer service skills. Dreos, in particular, was a specimen of the Vorath military philosophy made flesh. He was large even by Vorath standards, with the gray-green scaled hide of the northern breeding lines, and a facial structure that communicated approximately one emotion, which was contempt. He wore his rank badge with the specific pride of someone who knows he is small within a large institution, and compensates by being as unpleasant as possible to anyone with less authority than himself. On the afternoon in question, the checkpoint line was long. There had been a supply delivery that morning, and half the station seemed to be moving cargo through at once. The air was hot. The ventilation system on that level had been underperforming for 2 weeks because the Vorath administrator had declined to approve the maintenance request. People were tired and irritable, and the line was moving slowly because Drahos and his 2 subordinates were inspecting every container with the thoroughness of beings who had absolutely nowhere else to be. Mara Voss had gotten separated from the main Voss group by about 3 meters. Not far, not concerning. She was standing near the checkpoint barrier holding her stuffed blue dog, watching the cargo inspections, with the frank curiosity that human children apply to absolutely everything. She was not in the way. She was not touching anything. She was simply a small person standing in a space existing in it, with the uncomplicated confidence of someone who has not yet learned that the universe is full of beings who will decide her existence is inconvenient. Drahos decided her existence was inconvenient. He did not warn her. He did not gesture for her to move. He did not look at her with the particular coldness of someone who is about to do something they will regret. He just turned mid-step and struck her across the face with the back of his hand. She fell. The stuffed blue dog flew 3 feet in the other direction. The entire checkpoint went silent. Not the comfortable silence of a pause in conversation. The crystallized, suspended silence of a room full of beings who have just seen something that rewrites the next several hours of their lives, whether they want it to or not. Mara did not cry immediately. That was the part that stayed with me. She sat on the ground for 2 full seconds, hand pressed to her cheek, eyes wide, processing what had just happened, with the delayed comprehension of a child whose brain is still catching up to her body's experience. Then she looked across the checkpoint line, and I turned to follow her gaze. Callum Voss had been standing at a cargo scanner 6 meters away, talking to a Vorath customs official about a shipment of processed grain. He had a datapad in one hand. He had been relaxed in the way that experienced traders learn to be relaxed in tense situations, a deliberate, practiced looseness that keeps negotiations moving. He was not relaxed anymore. I want to be precise about what I saw because I am a trained observer, and precision is my profession. He did not move immediately. That is the part that the accounts get wrong when they retell this story, and they do retell it across 12-star systems and counting. People say he charged. People say he screamed. People say he became something unrecognizable. None of that is accurate. What Callum Voss did in the 2 seconds after his daughter hit the floor was go very still. Not the stillness of shock, not the stillness of fear. A different kind. The stillness of a being who has made a decision so completely and so finally that there is no longer any internal conflict requiring external expression. Every question had been asked and answered in the space between one breath and the next. The datapad in his hand lowered slowly. His eyes moved from Mara to Drahos, with a precision that I can only describe as targeting. And then he smiled. I have thought about that smile for a long time. It was not angry. It was not threatening in any of the ways that a smile can be threatening. It was patient. It was the smile of someone who has just been told exactly what the rest of their day is going to look like, and has decided that is fine. The customs official said something to him. I could not hear it from my position. Callum did not respond to the official. He set the datapad down on the scanner counter, with the careful deliberateness of someone who intends to pick it up again later, and he walked toward the checkpoint barrier. Draenonis had already turned back to his work. He had struck a child and turned back to his work with the casual dismissiveness of someone who considers the matter closed. He was looking at a manifest. He did not notice Callum Voss approaching, because Callum Voss was not approaching loudly, or quickly, or in any way that would register as a threat to someone who defines threats by volume and speed. Hey, Callum said. His voice was conversational. I am not exaggerating. He said it the way you might say it to a friend you spotted across a market. Hey, here I am. Nothing alarming. Drahos turned. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds. I am not going to describe it in detail, partly because this is a record intended for congregate archives, and partly because I genuinely could not track all of it with my eyes. What I can tell you is that Drahos weighed approximately 240 kilograms, that Vorath guards at checkpoints are armed with a standard sidearm, a contact baton, and a secondary blade, and that at the end of those 4 seconds, none of those things were in Drahos's possession, and Drahos was on the floor, and Callum Voss was standing over him, holding the contact baton with the loose-wristed grip of someone who has used one before. He was not breathing hard. He looked down at Draus the way you look at a task you have completed. Then he turned, walked back to where Mara was sitting, sat down on the floor beside her, and picked up the stuffed blue dog. He handed it to her. She took it. He put his arm around her, and he said something quiet that I could not hear, and she leaned into him, and he pressed his lips to the top of her head. The entire checkpoint was still watching. The two other Vorath guards were also still watching, which was interesting because they had not moved to assist Draos, which told me something about the internal politics of that particular posting that I did not have time to analyze right now. What I did have time to notice was that 3 other humans from the Voss trading group had appeared, as if from the walls themselves, positioned at the 3 exits of the checkpoint level. I had not seen them arrive. I did not know when they had arrived. They were not doing anything threatening. They were just present, standing in doorways with their arms at their sides and their eyes on the checkpoint. One of them, a tall woman with dark red hair pulled back from her face, looked at the Vorath guards with an expression that I can only describe as an invitation. Not to fight. Not exactly. More like a question. A very direct question. It sounded like, "Is there anything else?" There was not anything else. Draos was removed by his subordinates. Mara Voss was taken with her father and her stuffed blue dog back to the Voss Corner district. I filed an incident report with the Congregate Monitoring Office, in which I attempted to describe what I had witnessed with professional neutrality. And then, I sat in my office for about an hour, just thinking I had seen interspecies altercations before. I had documented 37 of them across 4 postings. I understood combat. I understood threat responses. I understood protective instinct as a biological mechanism. What I did not understand, and what I spent that entire hour failing to understand, was the smile. Because here is the thing about Callum Boss's smile that I have not mentioned yet. Here is the part that the retelling always skips, because it is uncomfortable and strange, and does not fit cleanly into any narrative framework the rest of the galaxy uses. He was still smiling when he sat down next to Mara. Not the targeting smile, a different one, softer. The one he had worn when she was cheating at the board game. Like none of this had cost him anything. Like this was just another part of the day. I did not understand it then. I understand it now. The Vorath response came in 3 stages, which is their standard protocol for what they classify as a civilian resistance incident. Stage 1 is administrative, a formal demand for the individual responsible to present themselves to the garrison authority for processing. Stage 2 is punitive. If the individual does not comply, their associates and dependents face restricted movement. Stage 3 is demonstrative. If restriction does not produce compliance, an example is made. The Vorath administrator on Pellar 9 was a man named Vorak Sen, and I want to be fair to him here. I genuinely do, because history has not been kind to Vorax, and some of that is his own fault, and some of it is circumstance. He was a mid-level bureaucrat who had been assigned to Pellar 9 because his political connections were adequate but not exceptional. And he had been managing the slow annexation process for 3 years without any significant complications. He was competent, he was not creative, and he was fatally working from a playbook that had been written for situations that did not include Callum Voss. He issued the Stage 1 demand within 2 hours of the checkpoint incident. Callum Voss sent back a response that I will quote directly from the official communication record because it deserves to be preserved exactly as written. Thank you for your message. I am available for a meeting at your convenience. I would suggest you bring someone who can discuss the legal parameters of checkpoint authority over non-Varath nationals under the Polari Commerce Accords, specifically clauses 7 through 14, as I will have questions. Also, your guard struck my daughter. I would like that, addressed formally before any other discussion. Proceeds best regards. Callum Boss. Vorax read this message and made a mistake. He interpreted it as negotiation. It was not negotiation. It was notification. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning in the administrative wing of the station's central hub. I attended as a congregate observer, which I had formally requested permission to do, citing the ongoing documentation of the annexation process, and which Voroxen had approved because, having a congregate observer present, gave the proceedings an air of legitimacy that he wanted. Callum Voss arrived alone. No legal representation, no associates, no visible backup of any kind. He was wearing clean work clothes and carrying a single document folder, and he looked for all purposes like a man who had come to a meeting. Vorax had 8 guards in the room, I noticed that Callum noticed the 8 guards in the same way that you or I might notice a minor architectural detail with brief acknowledgement and no particular feeling about it. He sat down. Voracen began, as Vorath officials always begin with the formal recitation of grievances. The incident at the checkpoint, the assault on an Imperial officer, the disruption of administrative process, the required response under Imperial Code. Callum listened to all of it. He had his hands folded on the table. He nodded occasionally. He waited until Voracen finished. Then he opened his document folder. Clause 9 of the Polari Commerce Accords, he said, states that Imperial security personnel operating within commercial zones, designated as multinational, do not hold authority to physically compel or discipline non-Vorath nationals unless those nationals present an active security threat. My daughter is 7 years old. She was not presenting a security threat. Therefore, under the terms your empire signed, when it was granted administrative co-authority over this station, the action taken by your guard was not legal. He placed the document on the table. I would like a formal acknowledgement of that in writing before we proceed. Voracen looked at him. Voracen looked at the 8 guards. Voracen looked back at him. You struck an Imperial officer. Voracen said, I defended my child. Callum said, those are different things. You know they are different things. That is why you have not arrested me already, because you know that any formal proceeding will require you to justify the original action, and you cannot justify it under the accords you are legally bound by. There was a silence. It was not a comfortable silence. The Empire, Voracen said carefully, does not recognize the accords as superseding Imperial authority within administrative zones. The Empire, Callum said, just as carefully signed them. Another silence. Mr. Voss Var XN said, I want to be clear about something. You are one man in an Imperial-administered station, surrounded by Imperial personnel. Whatever legal argument you believe you have, the practical reality of your situation is what Callum said. He said it pleasantly, curiously even. The way you ask a question you genuinely want the answer to. Vorax did not finish the sentence, and I wrote in my observation notes in handwriting that was slightly less steady than my professional standard. Something is wrong. I do not know what it is yet. But something is very wrong with this situation, and I think I am the only person in this room who is correctly afraid. I was right, but not in the way I expected. Let me tell you what Voraxen did not know. He did not know that Callumvos had spent 11 years before his trading career as a field operative for a human organization called the Reach Directorate, which, depending on who you ask, either does not exist or is responsible for approximately 40% of the quiet political shifts in human-adjacent space over the last 2 decades. He did not know that the trading group operating out of Voss Corner was not, strictly speaking, only a trading group. He did not know that the 3 humans who had appeared at the checkpoint exits the previous afternoon had not appeared by coincidence or instinct. But because Callum Voss had sent a signal from his wrist communicator in the half-second between setting down his datapad and walking toward Dreos, he had planned it. Not the incident itself, but the response to the incident. The response had been planned for months, in the quiet way that experienced operatives plan for contingencies they hope will never arrive, but prepare for anyway. Because hope is not a strategy. I did not know any of this during the meeting. I found it out later in pieces from sources I am not going to name in a document that will eventually enter the Congregate's General Archive. What I can tell you is that by the time Callum Voss sat down across from Vorax with his document folder and his folded hands, he had already done 3 things that Voraxen did not know about. First, he had sent a full recording of the checkpoint incident with legal annotation referencing the Polari Commerce Accords to the Congregate's Judicial Monitoring Division, not a complaint. A formal evidentiary submission time-stamped, certified, and copied to 4 separate Congregate member species diplomatic offices, including 2 who had been looking for a procedural lever against Vorath expansion in this sector for the better part of a decade. Second, he had spoken via encrypted communication with someone he referred to in later accounts only as the Bridge, which I believe to be a contact within the Vorath internal administration itself, someone who had their own reasons for wanting Vorax's annexation timeline disrupted. Third, and this is the part that I think about most often, he had made sure Mara was on a transport off Pellery 9x6 in the morning, safe, gone, out of reach of anything that was about to happen. He had sent his daughter away before he walked into that meeting room. Think about what that means. Think about what kind of person does that. How completely and coldly they have assessed the situation. how certain they are of the shape of the next several hours. He knew before he sat down exactly how this was going to go. He was not there to negotiate. He was not there to be intimidated. He was there to document on official record the precise moment when the Vorath administration chose to threaten him rather than address the legal complaint. Because that moment was the peace he needed, and Voracen handed it to him. "The practical reality of your situation," Voracen said, completing the sentence he had left unfinished, apparently deciding that authority required him to finish it after all, "is that this station is under Imperial administration, and individuals who assault Imperial personnel do not simply walk out of administrative meetings." Callum looked at him. "So I am being detained," he said. "You are being held for processing under which clause of the Commerce Accords under Imperial Code 7, Section 42, which supersedes the Accords, which takes precedence in matters of Imperial security?" Callum nodded slowly. He reached into his document folder and placed a second sheet on the table. "I want to be clear," he said, "that I am noting for the record that I am being detained without charge under a claimed Imperial authority that contradicts the treaty obligations of this station. I am also noting that I have requested a formal acknowledgement of the original incident, and that request has not been addressed." He looked up. "Is there a congregate observer present who can confirm this record?" There was a pause. Everyone in the room turned to look at me. I looked at my notepad. I looked at Callum. I looked at Vorax. "Yes," I said. "I can confirm." My voice was steadier than I expected. Given that my hands were not, Vorax's expression did not change. But something behind his eyes shifted. The way a calculation shifts when a new variable enters the equation and ruins all the previous working. He had not thought about the observer. He had approved my presence thinking it would add legitimacy to his proceedings, and it had just not to the proceedings he intended. "Take him to holding." Vorax said the guards moved. And this is where I need to be precise again, because this is the part the stories get most wrong. Callum Voss did not resist. He stood up. He straightened his jacket. He allowed 2 of the guards to take his arms, and he went with them cooperatively. And as he passed my position at the side of the room, he looked at me with the most ordinary expression you have ever seen on a human face and said, "Make sure your recording device is backed up to an off-station server." Then he was gone. I backed up my recording device to an off-station server. The holding level of Pellar 9's administrative wing was not a comfortable place. It was designed to hold cargo disputes and permit violations mostly, and the cells were industrial and graceless, with slab benches and ventilation that sounded like an argument between 2 machines that hated each other. There were 12 cells on that level, and on the afternoon of Callum Voss's detention, 11 of them were empty. He was in the 12th. I know what happened in that cell over the next 4 hours, because of the station's internal monitoring system, which as part of the congregate's oversight mandate, I had access to review after the fact. What happened in that cell over the next 4 hours was nothing. Callum Voss sat on the slab bench. He looked at the wall. Occasionally, he closed his eyes. He did not pace. He did not demand to speak with anyone. He did not attempt to contact the outside through any visible means. He just waited with the focused patience of something geological outside the cell. The station was not waiting. The congregate's Judicial Monitoring Division received the evidentiary submission and flagged it for priority review within 40 minutes of the meeting. 2 of the diplomatic offices that had been copied sent formal inquiries to the Vorath Administrative Office on Pellar 9 within the hour. The 3rd sent an inquiry directly to the Vorath Imperial Diplomatic Bureau, which meant it was now a problem for people significantly more senior than Vorax. The 4th, a species called the Dawn, who had a long memory and a specific grievance with the Vorath Empire dating back to the Sector 8 border disputes, sent their inquiry to 3 separate news distribution networks. The story was published within 2 hours. A human child, a Vorath checkpoint guard, a father, and an empire that had detained that father for the legal complaint he had filed about it. I want to be fair to the Vorath Empire here, as I wanted to be fair to Voraxen. They are not uniquely villainous. They are in many respects a thoroughly ordinary empire, which means they are very good at expanding and very bad at knowing when to stop. They had absorbed 32 systems in the last century, using the same playbook, and it had worked 32 times, and there was no mechanism in their institutional memory for recognizing when the conditions had changed. They did not know what humans did when you made their situation visible. At hour 5, Voracen received a communication from the Imperial Diplomatic Bureau. I did not see this communication directly, but I saw its effects, which were significant. Within 40 minutes of receiving it, Voracen had ordered Callum Voss released from holding, had issued a formal statement acknowledging that procedural questions regarding the checkpoint incident would be reviewed, and had requested an urgent communication with the garrison commander, whose name was Warlord Brexen. Now, we get to the part the title is about. Brexen was not Verican, where Verican was a mid-level bureaucrat trying to manage a complicated situation. Brexen was the kind of military commander who had gotten where he was by treating complications as threats and threats as targets. He commanded the Vorath garrison in this sector from a warship called the Iron Obligation, which was parked in high orbit above Pelori 9, like a very large and very aggressive ceiling. He had been following the situation on the station with increasing irritation, and when Vorax's panicked request for guidance reached him, Brexen made a decision. He decided that the problem was that no one had been frightening enough. He sent a detachment of 12 soldiers to the station with orders to move through Voss Corner, confiscate all Voss trading assets pending security review, and make very clear in physical and unmistakable terms that the Vorath Empire did not respond to legal filings by backing down. He also sent a personal message to Callum Voss. I have the text of this message. I am going to quote it in full because it is important. Human, you have been released as a procedural courtesy that should not be mistaken for weakness. Your complaint has been noted and filed appropriately, which is to say it will not be addressed. Your business assets on this station are currently being processed under security review. If you choose to escalate this matter further through any channel, including the congregate oversight bodies you have been communicating with, I will ensure that Polari 9's operating licenses are reviewed for compliance with new Imperial administrative standards, which will result in the closure of every non-Ver operation on this station. I am giving you this warning because I prefer efficiency to unnecessary conflict. Stand down, Warlord Brexen. Callum Voss received this message approximately 4 minutes after being released from holding. He read it according to the station's corridor monitoring, while walking back toward Voss Corner. And when he finished reading it, he stopped walking for a moment and stood in the corridor. Then he made a call. I do not know who he called. The communication was encrypted at a level I do not have access to even now. What I know is that the call lasted 90 seconds, and when it ended, Callum Voss put his communicator in his pocket, and he went back to his office, and he started making coffee. I genuinely believe he already knew what was going to happen. I believe he had been waiting for Brexen to do exactly this. The 12 soldiers arrived in Voss Corner 40 minutes later. They were thorough. They were aggressive. They broke things that did not need to be broken, as soldiers sometimes do when they have been given permission to be unpleasant. They loaded cargo containers onto transport carts with the specific carelessness of authority asserting itself. Several of the non-human traders in the adjacent market sections watched from their doorways, because at this point, the entire station knew what was happening, and opinion on how it would resolve was divided primarily along the lines of how much each individual had personally experienced Vorath administrative courtesy. What they found when they arrived at the main Voss Corner warehouse was Callum Voss sitting at a table outside with a cup of coffee watching them. He watched them move through the district. He watched them take inventory. He watched them break 2 of his display cases, which for the record contained processed grain samples and were not a security threat by any measure. He watched all of this with the expression of a person who is being rained on and has already decided that getting wet is fine. Then one of the soldiers, apparently feeling that the watching was itself some kind of defiance, walked up to him and told him to go inside. Callum looked at the soldier. No, he said. The soldier reached for him, and then the red-haired woman was there. I told you about her before, the one who had been standing in the checkpoint exit with the question in her eyes. Her name was Petra Voss, Callum's sister, and she had come from somewhere that I once again could not track. And she was not alone. There were 6 humans behind her, and 2 of them were carrying equipment cases that I recognized as long-range communication arrays, not weapons. Communication arrays. What are those for? The soldier demanded. Broadcasting, Petra said. Broadcasting what? This, she said. And she pointed at the array that was already active and already transmitting, not just to the congregate monitoring office, but to the 17 news networks that had picked up the story in the previous 5 hours, and to the diplomatic offices, and to a public channel that had been opened under the title Live Vorath Military Action Against Civilian Traitors. Pylori 9. The soldier looked at the camera. The camera looked back. "We have been broadcasting," Petra said pleasantly, "for about 20 minutes. I will compress the next part because the documentary record covers it extensively, and I was not present for all of it. What happened in brief is this. The live broadcast was viewed by approximately 400,000 beings across 12 systems within the first hour. The images of soldiers breaking display cases full of grain samples were apparently not a compelling demonstration of imperial strength. The Congregate's Judicial Division, which had already flagged the evidentiary submission, issued a formal inquiry to the Vorath Imperial Administration within 2 hours. 3 Congregate member species recalled their trade representatives from Vorath administrative stations pending review. The Duron, who once again proved themselves the most committed participants in this entire affair, filed a motion with the Congregate Council to review Pylori 9's administrative status entirely. Brexen received all of this information in the span of about 90 minutes, and his response was to do the thing that had gotten the Vorath Empire to its current position of 32 absorbed systems, which was to treat a political problem as a military one. He ordered a weapons lock on Pylori 9's commercial docking bays. He transmitted a new message to the station, this time addressed to all inhabitants, informing them that the station was now under elevated security protocol and that any communication transmissions from the station required Imperial clearance, and he began moving the iron obligation out of high orbit and into approach position. I was in my monitoring office when I received the alert about the ship movement. I sat for a moment looking at the screen. Then I made my own communication to the Congregate's Emergency Monitoring Center, and I said in the precise language required for a formal incident escalation that I believed Pylori 9 was in danger of an unauthorized military action against a multinational civilian population. That communication triggered a protocol. The protocol required Congregate Council notification. The Council was notified at the beginning of what humans call evening, and at the beginning of what humans call evening. 3 things happened simultaneously that I believe Brexen had not modeled in any of his planning. The first was that the Congregate Council voted in emergency session to invoke the Poria Accords arbitration mechanism, which automatically suspended Imperial administrative authority on the station pending review and placed the station under Congregate temporary protection. This meant that Brexen's weapons lock was as of that vote a violation of Congregate protection protocols, which meant it was not a threat to Pylori 9 alone, but a direct provocation against the Congregate itself. The second was that 2 Congregate escort vessels, which had apparently been in the sector already, perhaps coincidentally, perhaps not, moved into positions that were not threatening, but were very clearly between the iron obligation and the station. The third was that the Vorath Imperial Diplomatic Bureau, which had been watching all of this unfold with the growing horror of an institution that understands the difference between manageable problems and historical disasters, sent a communication to Brexen. I do not have the exact text of this communication. What I have is the record of what happened after it was received. Brexen stood down. The weapons lock was released. The iron obligation returned to high orbit. The 12 soldiers were recalled from Voss Corner. Brexen issued a formal public statement acknowledging that the checkpoint incident had been a violation of the Commerce Accords and that the guard responsible had been removed from his posting. And then, at what I would describe as approximately 10 minutes after the council vote, a new communication was distributed to all diplomatic offices, all news networks, and the Congregate's public record. It was from the Vorath Imperial Diplomatic Bureau, and it announced that Warlord Brexen had been relieved of his command, effective immediately, pending an internal review of his conduct during the Pylori 9 situation. It also announced in the formal language that empires use when they are cleaning up after themselves and hoping no one examines the mess too closely, that his rank insignia and command authority had been formally revoked. The title of this account says, "His head hung in the council chamber." That is a metaphor for anyone wondering, the kind of translation that travels between species and picks up drama on the way. What actually hung in the council chamber, delivered by Vorath diplomatic courier as a gesture of institutional apology, was Brexen's command seal, which in Vorath military culture is apparently roughly equivalent. His career was over. Vorasen's career was more quietly, also over. He was reassigned to a posting so distant and so administrative that it amounted to the Vorath Empire telling him, in the diplomatic language of bureaucratic punishment, to go think about what he had done. Drahos, the guard who had struck Mara, was charged under Vorath military code with conduct unbecoming and dismissed from service. This was the only piece of the outcome that was not in any way surprising. Empires are very good at sacrificing the people at the bottom of the hierarchy when the people at the top need the problem to go away. I do not know what happened to Drahos after that. I do not think about it much. I ran into Callum Voss 2 days after the resolution. He was restocking his display cases, the broken ones that his sister and 2 other Voss Corner employees were helping him repair, and he had a cup of coffee in one hand, and was directing the placement of grain samples with the cheerful authority of a man who has absolutely no interest in discussing the events of the last 4 days. I stopped. "Mr. Voss," I said. He looked over. "Observer on. You want some coffee?" "No, thank you." I paused. "I want to ask you something." "Sure. Did you know?" I said from the beginning how this was going to go. He considered the question with the head tilt I had noticed before. Then he set down the display case panel he was holding and looked at me properly. "No," he said. "Not exactly, but approximately." "Approximately," he said. "Yes. The legal filings, the broadcast, the congregate channels. You had all of that ready before the meeting. I had it ready before the incident." He said, "I had seen the checkpoint tightening for 3 months. I knew it was going to go badly at some point. I just needed." He paused. "A reason?" I said, "A reason they gave me?" He said, "That is different." I thought about that for a moment. "They hit your daughter." I said, "Yes." His voice did not change when he said it. It was the same ordinary conversational voice, but something under it was not ordinary. I do not know how to describe it better than that. "And that," I said, "was when the plan became real." He picked up the display case panel again. He looked at where it needed to go. "My daughter is safe," he said. "My business is intact. The people responsible are gone. The accords are on record as having been violated and then upheld." He placed the panel carefully. "That is a good outcome. It is a remarkable outcome," I said for one man, starting with a legal filing. He looked at me sideways, and for the first time I saw something in his expression that I could only call amusement. Real amusement, the kind that comes from someone who finds something genuinely funny in a way they are not going to explain. The legal filing was the weapon observer, he said. Everything else was just making sure it had a clear shot. Then his sister called his name from across the district. Something about the replacement hinges being the wrong size, and he walked away, and I stood there in the middle of the repaired market with my notepad and my recording device, and the distinct sensation of having been educated. I filed my final report on the Pylori 9 incident 6 weeks later. It runs to approximately 300 pages, including all documented evidence, time-stamped recordings, communication records, and my own observational notes. The summary conclusion, which is the part that will likely be read by anyone who does not have a specific professional reason to read the rest, says the following. The Pylori 9 incident represents a significant case study in the limits of conventional military and administrative deterrence when deployed against a population that has fully internalized the architecture of multilateral legal frameworks. The Vorath administration's escalation strategy failed not because of superior opposing force, but because each escalation step was anticipated, documented, and converted into legal and diplomatic leverage before the Vorath actors had recognized the conversion was occurring. The decisive factor in the outcome was not the use of force, though force was used, and used effectively in the initial incident. The decisive factor was timing, preparation, and the willingness of the human actor to accept short-term personal risk in order to create the conditions for a systemic response. What I did not put in the report because it is not the kind of thing that belongs in a 300-page congregate document is this. The whole thing started because a man saw his daughter fall, and the smile, the patient, unhurried, completely certain smile of a person who has looked at the situation and found it manageable. Not because it was easy, not because it was safe, but because there are people in this galaxy for whom the calculation is simple, and the calculation is, you do not get to do that. Not to mine, not ever. And everything else? The legal filings, the broadcasts, the diplomatic channels, the 90-con phone call, the backed-up recording device, all of it is just the shape of what that calculation looks like when it moves through the world. I asked Callum Voss as a final question during that last conversation in the market, whether he had been afraid. He thought about it honestly, which I appreciated, not of them. He said, of what then? He looked across the market toward the repaired display cases, and the dust mows moving in the ventilation air, and the ordinary unhurried life of a station that had been through something and come out the other side. Of not being fast enough, he said. Then he went back to work. I closed my notepad. Somewhere on a transport moving through open space, a 7-year-old girl was holding a stuffed blue dog, and the Vorath Empire was learning, slowly, and at significant cost, the lesson that every empire eventually learns. There are easier systems to annex than the ones with humans in them. What part of this story got you the most? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy Witness, this like and subscribe is why God gave humans such an unbreakable will. No force in the galaxy can hold us back. God brought you here for a reason. If you believe in the power of the human spirit, hit subscribe. Join the Golden Age. See you among the stars.